All right, I am going to go ahead and kick it off. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited about this kickoff today. We are going to be talking about AI and ethics. I come from a background of technology. I'm also a researcher in bias, so this is a super interesting topic for me. Listen up, we've got an incredible panel for you today. Write down your questions and we'll come back with questions towards the end. Jason, our moderator, please kick it off.
All right, thank you, Jody, and welcome everyone. I'm so excited for our panel conversation today. My name is Jason Peterson. I'm an associate professor in the accounting and business law department. I'm also chair of that department. I teach courses in business ethics, as many of you know, in business law, both the undergrad level and in the MBA curriculum. And we in having conversations with Jody and other folks interested in artificial intelligence, we realized we really needed to make an intentional effort to better integrate it into our curriculum, which we did pretty extensively with our second one-credit course in our MBA program, contextualizing values-based decision making. And after doing that, we realized that there's a lot of room for a really interesting panel conversation. So I was so happy that we were able to have three panelists with different perspectives, all three experts in the field coming at artificial intelligence really from three different perspectives, which I think is perfect for this type of conversation. So I'm going to allow each of them to introduce themselves. I'll start with Sam.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm a professor at Temple University, and I'm coming to you from Philadelphia. And my background in the courses I teach are somewhat diverse. I teach law, I teach anatomy, and then I combine the two and I teach forensics. And it's in the forensics area that I've become involved with artificial intelligence.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Looking forward to your perspectives. Andrew.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. My name is Andy Hanna, and I actually come from Pittsburgh here, and with the dual persona. First, I am an adjunct professor at the University of Pittsburgh Business School, where I teach the integration of AI and advanced analytics into business problems. I have classes at the undergraduate, graduate, and the executive MBA level. And then I am also the founder and president of a company called OTHOT, which is part of the Liaison family. And we focus on using AI and advanced analytics to help universities with their student body and enrollment, student success, and postgraduate student success.
Thank you, Andy. And our third panelist, Kate.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. I'm excited to be a part of this panel and looking forward to our conversation. So I'm coming from Chicago. It's a bit rainy today, but also beautiful. And I am a senior manager out of Deloitte Consulting, and I'm our senior operations leader for the Deloitte AI Institute. I've been in what we call client service, or serving clients in the technology space, for roughly 15 years, and now leading the Institute.
All right. Thank you, Kate. I think the first question I'm going to ask each of our panelists is just generally, what do you see as some of the most troubling aspects of artificial intelligence? Let's start with that. Why don't we start with Sam?
I think a major problem with artificial intelligence is the inherent bias in the algorithms. It's interesting, when they did the sampling, especially with facial recognition technology, it turned out that they used white middle-aged men as their models. And what happens is that causes a bias with people of color, elderly, and women. And there's a 36% error rate with women in criminal law of getting arrested falsely. So that's one of the major areas that I see.
And Sam, I think we had conversations earlier too that a lot of your work is focused on AI in medicine. Are there any inherent difficulties there as well?
It's interesting. The difficulties in medicine are not what you think they'd be. When patients find out about the use of artificial intelligence in their diagnosis, they don't want to follow it. They're afraid of it. Number two, they want to pay less for it, which is kind of strange. And three, the computer doesn't have any empathy. So what happens is it will make a decision and it won't consider perhaps that the person should be in a nursing home, but they don't have the financial capabilities for it. So there's this hole that's left because of the lack of empathy.
That's really interesting. Sam, what are some of your thoughts?
You mean
Oh, I'm
somebody
sorry,
else?
Sam. Sorry,
Yeah.
Andrew. Andy, sorry.
Yeah, no, but I can go by Sam as well. I think one of the big hurdles that we have to overcome is the understanding of exactly what AI and advanced analytics is. I mean, there is a lack of general understanding of how to use it, what it means. And let's face it, AI is inherently a math-based system, right? So that you have to have comfort with math to understand what it's doing. So I think, and then we have the public press that likes to point at AI as being, a bad person, if you will, that it's being used to minimize certain parts of the population or disadvantage them. And I think there's a ton of education that needs to happen generally for us to accept and use AI in a meaningful way.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah, Jason, I'll
Okay.
pile onto that one. I fully agree with Andrew. I think there's the lack of understanding or lack of AI fluency that exists across, just our general population. And I think what that leads to is a lack of trust, which touches on what Sam kind of mentioned with regards to bias as one reason why, somebody's not trusting the results of the algorithm and the medical advice that it's giving. So I think that that lack of fluency leads to a lack of trust because we don't understand what it's doing. So why should I trust what it said, right? And I think that's a big challenge that we need to overcome.
And Kate, I'm going to stay with you for a minute. And I think in much of your work has been in around developing a framework in that area. Could you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, so we've developed what we call our trustworthy AI framework, and it's really a framework to take a look at 6 different elements that help you sort of evaluate the AI that you have within your organization to make sure that it's fair and impartial, or to review how robust or reliable it is, ensure that there's privacy, considerations in place, that it's secure and safe from cyber, that it's responsible and making and accountable and making responsible decisions on behalf of the organization and the data that it's inherently evaluating, and that it's transparent and explainable, which are 2 very different things that sometimes get conflated, I think, in the industry. But all of those, I think what we see our clients struggling with is maybe they've solved for the safe and secure and they've got cyber protection all over their algorithms, right? Or maybe they feel like they've really protected themselves and their clients and their customers for privacy because they put in a bunch of privacy clauses at the end of a very long, contract or something, right? But if you haven't really considered how transparent it is, how fair it is, how robust it is, right? Then there are guardrails that are not in place that maybe you should be considering as you're building algorithms and as you're monitoring and managing them as they evolve, So we've kind of put together that framework so our clients can think about all of those questions and whether or not they can answer, is my AI fair? Is it robust? Is it transparent, et cetera?
So, Andy, I had a follow-up question with respect to the framework that Kate had mentioned. In your entrepreneurial endeavors, do some of those touch points resonate with how you approach those sorts of decisions?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, understanding why the predictions are what they are. So, for example, our company helps predict the behavior. So we're predicting whether or not a student's going to enroll in a particular college or university, whether they're going to have success while they're there, meaning could be persistence or graduation and then postgraduate. So we're predicting these behaviors, and then the models are suggesting prescriptions are a way to improve, increase the probability that you get the outcome that you want. It's hard, especially when you're bringing a new technology into an industry that's been around for arguably 1,000 years, that to get people to embrace change is very difficult. And the only way that you can do that is to bring transparency to what the models are doing. So why are the predictions what the predictions are? And what is the error around those predictions? How were those models built? So we spent a lot of time sort of building those, the answers to those questions so that our clients can understand them and have trust. Kate used that word, that is the critical word, trust in the decision making. And it takes time. I mean, people have to see that it works and it's real before that trust actually takes hold.
Sam, I had a question for you in terms, so I'm a lawyer, you're a lawyer, and we both think along the lines of regulatory gaps. How do you see the regulatory gaps with respect to AI and how those gaps may be filled?
The gaps are very significant. Here's the basic problem. There is no precedent for what's transpiring. The law traditionally lags behind the technology by about 10 years. So when we have a problem that comes up, we don't know what the answers are right now. So if I look, for instance, at medicine, all right, so let me give you an example. So the computer has been programmed to render diagnosis based on its databases. And it comes down and it issues a diagnosis. The doctor relies upon that diagnosis. The problem is the diagnosis is wrong and the patient is harmed. So the issues that are going to come up will be as follows. Who is responsible? Is it the doctor? Is it the AI developer? Is it the software programmer? To what extent will each one be responsible? There are no answers to that at this point in time. And what will happen is it will create problems. So there's many applications of AI. If we look at one, let's look at by way of sector. If we look at law enforcement, how is, law enforcement has now greatly relied upon facial recognition technology to solve crimes. Big Brother really is watching. You walk outside, there's going to be 3 cameras on you as you walk down the street. If a crime is committed, the first thing the police look at are the cameras, and they'll use facial recognition technology to solve it. So the issues with crime, I think, will be simple. They'll apply the constitutional principles and look to see if there's a constitutional violation. Where the difficulty arises that I see is in the business sector, because there is no constitution in the business sector. So if we try to use traditional principles of law, we're going to look at the law of torts, negligence, we'll look at the law of products liability, and we'll look at the law of breach of warranty. Here is the problem. To pick up on what was said by the other speakers, AI evolves. All right. So AI in medicine, the doctor, when I sell the equipment, the doctor is expected to add materials, patient records, treatises to the database. So if something goes wrong, the manufacturer will say, it was fine when I sold it to you. It was the changes that you made after. The second thing that happens is AI gives you a result. It doesn't tell you how it got at that result. And when we look at law, that's a critical problem. Another thing that will happen is if everybody is now using AI in medicine, the duty of care, which is a standard of negligence, can change. Right now, the duty of care is the average physician in the locality where that physician practices. All right, it's been the standard for years. However, if everybody has access to artificial intelligence, now the standard of care may change. And what is anticipated is that the courts may move to a national standard of care because everybody is going to have the same materials. So we don't know. Another problem is you sue the software programmer. Courts have traditionally said software is not a product for products liability. So what happens? We don't know. So we have these very unsettled areas of the law that will give a lot of angst to people who are using artificial intelligence.
And those regulatory gaps are such a critical aspect of artificial intelligence and
Yeah.
decision-making, business decision-making.
It's the most amazing thing. One of the biggest criticism of artificial intelligence is there are no regulations. There's only a handful of applications that are even governed by the Food and Drug Administration. Most are not. For some reason, the federal government has not stepped in to regulate this area. There are some regulations. There's 23 states that have passed regulations with use of algorithms and protecting it. There's only 23 of them, and the laws are all different. So there's nothing uniform. And that's why it creates uncertainty. And the litigation, we don't know what it's going to happen. We can only guess.
So I'll pose a question to Andy and Kate. In the absence of regulation, what is the responsibility? How can we ensure that the decision making is inherently values based? Or is that possible? Is that
Kate, you want to go first? I mean, I have a perspective, but
Yeah, Andrew, go right ahead. I do have some thoughts, but
yeah, I think one of the things that I'd like to change about our perception of AI is that that we can't surrender decision making to the algorithm, and that when we, I would like people to think about AI as being an extension of themselves. I mean, humans process data all the time. They confer with others and they make decisions, even in the medical field. Why can't the AI be seen as a way to process huge amounts of data to provide different perspectives that the human brain can't, because it just can't process that amount of information? And that it is still the doctor or the business person or the lawyer or whoever making the decision, with that as being part of the decision-making process. And I think that the general public likes to think about, oh, it's AI making the decision. Well, only if we surrender the decision-making to that AI. And we can build explainability into algorithms now. I mean, technology is getting much, much better in terms of we can tell you why a person has a prediction or prescription that's being offered. So I think it's evolving, as Sam said. And so that's just my perspective. I think I don't want us to jump to the AI being the decision maker. It is still the human.
And just to jump in, I absolutely agree with you. And there are a number of critics that say we shouldn't call it artificial intelligence. We should call it augmented intelligence.
100%.
Meaning that, you know what, the doctor has to make the final decision. I don't care that the computer is coming out and giving you all the diagnosis with mathematical certainties. The doctor is the final arbiter, and that decision rests with the doctor. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying.
yeah, I do too. We call it at Deloitte, we call it the age of with, WITH, meaning that this is the next evolution, the next, we had the industrial age, right? We had the digital age. We call it the age of with because we truly believe it should be humans with machines. It's not just the machines, right? It's not robots taking over the world. It's not letting AI make all the decisions for us, right? It is humans still making decisions, just augmented with something that can make decisions a little faster than us, right? We still have to make a call at the end of the day. And to go back to the regulations piece of it, just to put it into context of still that like history lesson, I guess, right? Think about when the first car came onto the road, right? There were no regulations there. There were no speed limits. There were no like street signs. There were no lines on the road. There were no stop signs. People just drove cars, right? You could drive a car off onto the sidewalk if you wanted to. And what the government put into place was not regulations to say, they didn't put in regulations to like very very closely regulate driving, they put in regulations that made slowly to make driving more safe for the individuals who were in the driver's seat, right? So they started to put windshields on the cars, and they started to put speed limits on the roads, right? Those are different across different roads. So speed limits are different across our states. There's different rules about when you can get a license and when the states feel like you're old enough to get a license. So when you think about regulations, we're at this really interesting time where AI is very, very new. We all kind of agree that there needs to be some guardrails in place in order to regulate it. But historically, when you think about what the government has put in place, they put in regulations that are a little bit more standoffish and much more focused on keeping their constituents safe, right? And I think that we're going to end up in a similar situation where the federal government isn't going to regulate everything very closely, at least in the U.S., right? And this is different across the globe, but that they're going to put in regulations that are going to help us keep individuals safe. The White House's bill on AI that just came out a few weeks ago, right, does just that. It really focuses on how do you keep the individual safe if you're using AI algorithms. And I think just as we saw with cars when they first came on the road years ago, I think we may see something similar here.
So Kate, you mentioned the Bill of Rights. And so in your mind, does that have some teeth? Will that make a difference? And
Yeah, I mean, obviously every bill is up for interpretation, right? But I think, it was, when you take a look at it, it was really focused on keeping the consumer and the constituent safe in several different ways, right? It was about the rights of me as an individual and understanding how my phone is processing my data, right? Or understanding how the cameras are viewing me when I'm walking my dog, right? So it was really very focused on the types of protections that I need as a personal individual and the considerations that need to be in place for the organizations that are using the AI that's evaluating me, right? And I think that's key, because that aligns with kind of that I mentioned back to the cars, right? That puts in the stop sign and the speed limit and the windshield and the seatbelt, right? Those are the things that are going to protect me as an individual.
And if I could take the opposite position, just to present both, to me, the AI Bill of Rights, when you hear the word Bill of Rights, what do you think? You think that with the Constitution, the Bill of Rights gives us individual protections and safeguards. So you think that you're really getting something with this Bill of Rights. But if we look at it, the Bill of Rights really focuses on 5 areas. One is they want it to be safe and effective. They don't want it to discriminate. They want privacy of data. They want to give notice of its use and to use plain language. And then they want to allow people to opt out. All right. And that's the goals. The problem is there's no remedies. The Bill of Rights doesn't give us any rights. It doesn't say that if the developers of the software do these things, I can sue them. There are absolutely no remedies given in the Bill of Rights. So I really think it's a misnomer to call it a Bill of Rights, because it's not a Bill of Rights. Are they goals that we should aspire to? Absolutely. All right. But they're not Bill of Rights. Another problem, and you mentioned before about in the United States, if we look at other countries of the world, the EU has a Bill of Rights. It has much more teeth than we have in the United States. The problem is, for instance, the EU, its rules apply to every application of artificial intelligence. The Bill of Rights in the United States does not do that. Our Bill of Rights is specific to sector and to application-specific approaches. And that's a real weakness. And the other areas that critics have pointed out where our Bill of Rights fails is that it doesn't deal with educational issues. It doesn't deal with worker surveillance. And more importantly, it says absolutely nothing about law enforcement's uses. So that's just some of the other side of the critics that have not been totally happy with our Bill of Rights.
thank you, Sam. Next question. Curious where, and maybe I'll start with Andy for this one. Where do you think AI and machine learning is headed generally? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think I would echo sort of what Kate said. I haven't heard it referred to as the width. I like that a lot. I often in my classes refer to it as the blur. And that is where, you know, that we're using AI and machine learning to augment, and say the word, the decision-making process. And I think the more education, the more that we can take a perspective that that's what AI is used best for, and that we can identify where it's creating harm. And I think that should be the focus of my opinion, of any Bill of Rights or any regulation that we have, is are we understanding where algorithms and how they're used are harming a segment of society or a group of people or whatever it may be. And I think when we can balance those two things, as having a perspective as it being the blur or the augmentation, and also educating, I think that's where we get the real fruits of using AI in decision making, and allow it to grow and flourish, and not to contain it too much too soon. You know, so if we don't let it grow and find ways of augmenting our life, then we lose potentially the richness. I'll just close with, you know, Tom Davenport, who's often seen as sort of the father of modern business analytics. I was at a symposium where he was last week, and he said, you know, we need to think about AI as replacing tasks, not humans. And then we can start to get along with it better.
Thank you, Andy. I had a general question for the three panelists, and it's shifting gears a bit, and it's in and around career paths, and for those who might be interested in a career in artificial intelligence, or that might not necessarily have a lot of technical background, where do you see that career path headed? Any thoughts from?
Well, I can start. So I was a politics major and did not start off obviously working in AI, did not have a background in technology. But I mentioned that because as we've talked about bias and fairness and how we're building these algorithms, we need to bring a diverse set of thinking and inclusive of a diverse set of history and background to that development. So I actually think, and we wrote a paper on this last year called Opening AI and Opening Doors to Diversity. I actually think there's a lot of opportunity for individuals who are thinking about AI and participating in AI development and design, because if we just have only that white male designing our algorithms, it inherently will be biased, because it does not, that white male doesn't represent our entire society, right? So we need thinkers who are coming from the arts and the sciences, and women and minorities, all contributing to the design and the development of AI, so that it is hopefully less biased and a little bit more fair and impartial. So I actually think it opens up the aperture for who could be participating in the full development life cycle of an AI algorithm, because we need that richness, within the development.
And I think that AI, some people have called it the fourth industrial revolution. I really see AI as being the job market of the future. There's more and more applications. Every industry is going to be using AI, and they're going to rely upon it more and more as a tool. And I just see the endless possibilities for people going into business, wanting to get a foot into the AI arena while it's still on the ground level. So I just see it being an unlimited opportunity for people at this point in time to get on the ground level of something that's going to take off.
And maybe if I can make a couple of comments from the business education side, at the University of Pittsburgh, we've actually overhauled our entire core curriculum for business undergraduates, where It's a stronger emphasis on math, on data mining. So every student will have to program in Python as part of their business training, as well as mine data, as well as make decisions using analytics and machine learning. And we coupled that with a business major in analytics. And that's meant to be a companion major for whatever their primary area of study is. So we firmly believe that the future lies in AI and analytics and math, and are preparing those students for that type of job market. And Deloitte hires a ton of our kids, so thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
All right, everybody. So we've got a bunch of questions coming in. Those of you in the audience, go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A section. But I want to start with really following up on Kate's point about diversity and underrepresentation. And this is actually my own personal question. I will actually clarify one thing. I don't think it's just white men. Actually, AI is quite diverse ethnically. You have a lot of people from Indian descent. You have a lot of people from Chinese descent. You have a lot of white men. You also have a huge percentage of international people who have come to the United States to do the work. So in actuality, it is diverse in many ways. The challenge is that it's not diverse in terms of the way people think. They come in predominantly, almost exclusively from a computer science or AI background. So I just want to clarify that, because I think it's a really important piece for people to understand. So my question to Kate, and maybe Sam and Andy can come in as well, is why? Why is it that there is this intimidation factor around going into AI for people? And what are different pathways that people can get into, say, if they were coming from art or from liberal arts or from management or even accounting? How would people come in? Why is the block there, and how might people come in? So I'll start with Kate, and then I'd love to hear Sam and Andy elaborate.
Yeah, I mean, I think the block is just, again, what we actually started talking about is that fluency piece, right? I think the block is a bit of how complex AI can be. And once you start to get into the nitty gritty of what a neural network is and how it works and the math behind it, right? That stuff could keep, I mean, I don't know how many hours you'd have to study, right? Like you've got to, like, there's something in the brain where like that stuff either works in your brain or it doesn't, right? And I think individuals shy away from participating in AI development, design, et cetera, because they think, oh my gosh, if I can't understand how this neural network works, like I'm probably never going to make it anywhere, right? So I think it's a little intimidating, to be honest. And I think they undercut why somebody with an arts background or a physical design background could really help support developing whatever the AI is supporting.
Cool.
Yeah.
And just to clarify my comment about the middle class, the white middle-aged male, I was talking about facial recognition technology.
Yes.
I wasn't talking about who's going into the field.
Right.
But if I could talk for a moment about business, forgetting the analytics, there are so many business applications that people can get into. For instance, marketing, advertising. What happens with, at least with the facial recognition technology and business, employers can use it to spot shoplifters coming into the store. And that we notify because we have them in the data bank. So the facial recognition technology spots them so we can watch them in the store. But even taking it a step further, and this is the amazing thing for the future, it can customize advertisements as you walk by. So I'm walking in a mall and there's a screen in front of me. This is happening. And all of a sudden, all of a sudden there's an advertisement for the jeans that I wear. All right.
I saw this on a sci-fi show I was watching last year.
Yeah, but this is happening. I walked on a cruise ship a year ago or 2 years ago before the epidemic. And as I'm walking into the dining room, the guy behind the screen says, "Hello, Mr. Hodge, how are you?" And I'm one of what, how many thousands of people? And I go, how do you know who I am? He says, oh, we take great pride in memorizing the names of our clients before they come in. Bull. They had facial recognition technology. But what did it do? It allowed the person on a ship of several thousand people to identify me as my name, making it personal.
Yeah.
I can walk into a store that I frequently, a restaurant, and they know my buying habits, and they'll say, oh, hello, Mr. Hodge, do you want a gin and tonic today? All right.
Yeah.
There's these marketing decisions that and advertising decisions that people have to realize that are opening up. Give you an example. How many people have gone to Amazon Go stores? Anybody? Yeah. So what happens now? Because of the AI technology, I walk into a store, I register my credit card, I walk around, I pick up products, I put them in my cart, and I walk out of the store. I don't go to a check line anymore. It's all artificial intelligence that everything, there's cameras are looking at me. They see what I pick up. They put it in the cart and they bill me when I walk out. I never see a clerk. These are the kinds of things that are open and the possibilities that are opening from a business point of view.
Just to add very quickly, I think when we think about the creation of products using AI, and I'll use products very broadly, saying that AI is being used to solve a problem or create an opportunity. That is a product process, right? The raw materials, the data, there's a magic AI box in the middle, and then there's these products at the end, which are predicting the likelihood that somebody's going to buy or commit fraud or whatever. And I think as we start to consider how those are built, those programs are built, those products are built, we have to start with the business question: what are we trying to solve? Then we need to think about the models and the data and actually modeling. And then we have to think about deployment, right? So those roles, those are, 75% of the roles around that.
Yeah.
The roles around that are people with different disciplines. How you deploy something, how you think about a question, how you solve a problem. And I think the more people that we put around a problem who have diverse backgrounds, constantly asking the question, okay, if we release this product, who will be harmed or who could be harmed? Then that helps us start to think about whether or not we're going to achieve the objective of that overall AI product that we're building.
Building on that point, there's a question from the audience. If I want to propose an AI-enabled product, for example, kitchen machines, to my management, what investment should I consider, and how should I project growth numbers? It's a tough question, actually.
Sounds like a consulting question.
But I think actually what's really interesting about the question is it really builds on Andy's your point, and also Kate, some of the work that Deloitte's doing around this, because one of the things that's the questioner's not asking is some of the impacts and the ethics around it. They're looking at it, and I think this is a challenge that many businesses are having. They're looking at it purely from the economics perspective and not thinking about some of the wider impacts. So if you were to think about, you want to pitch something to management as a product opportunity, what are the considerations that people should think about?
Yeah, so I can take this a little bit. I'm sure there's a lot of perspectives on this. I mean, of course, the bottom line, right? Someone's always going to ask you, what kind of a return are you going to expect, right? And we actually just published our 5th edition of our State of AI in the Enterprise. We interviewed over roughly 3,000 executives across the globe to understand what are they challenged with. And one of, I think it was top 3 was trying to get executive buy-in and making that use case for a product. So the individual that is asking the question on the call today is thinking just along the same lines as almost 3,000 C-suite executives across the globe. They're all struggling with this.
Yeah.
Of course, return on investment is going to hit that bottom line. But Jody, you mentioned, ethics. I think pointing out within that business case, if there's a way, the bottom line these days when it comes to consumer behavior is impacted by not just by not just the actual, cost of goods sold and revenue, received and everything, it is also impacted by if somebody believes that the AI that was used, against them or with them or for them is somewhat, irresponsible and is not being used in an ethical way. That will change buying behavior, right? Individuals want to believe that you're using sustainable products, that the AI in your organization is being used in a responsible way. And if they don't believe it is, people may adjust their buying behavior, and that will impact your bottom line, right? So if you can make that case that yes, there's going to be a return on this investment, and we can do this in a way that is safe for our consumers and can earn that trust of our consumers so that they do continue to come back to us, my company as a vendor, right? I think that's huge, because while the bottom line is typically goods and sold, goods and services and revenue coming back in, it is also, if you lose that customer because they don't believe that you're using AI or their data responsibly, I mean, that hits your bottom line as well.
And could also have knock-on effects from a brand perspective.
100%.
Anybody else want to come in on that?
Well, I think, Deloitte has a recipe, McKinsey has a recipe. We have a recipe for higher education in terms of how you start thinking about what questions you could answer with AI to have an impact on your business. So I think you need a guide. I mean, these days there's proven recipes to make it happen. And so either hiring somebody like that or working with the consultant to say, what are the steps? What's the opportunity? What are the steps? And how the hardest part is the costs, right? How do you make it sustainable? People often think about, oh, I'm going to write an algorithm that's going to give me an answer. No, you have to make it sustainable. It learns over time. It's an exponential, return in terms of how long it takes and the value you can get out of an AI program. And so all these things need to be understood. So I would suggest that you work with somebody who's done it before, that has a good formula to help work you through that process.
Cool. All right, we have another question/comment from the audience. AI seems to be a tool like a hammer. I am confused why we're talking about ethics, a higher standard than law, instead of creating enforceable ethical laws regarding privacy. Business is all about creating profits, rarely ethics, unless it will lead to profits. Until we can act ethically, how do we expect our tools to act ethically? I fear Elon Musk more than AI. I don't know if anybody's got a response to that. Go ahead, Sam.
The person who asked that is absolutely correct. One of the problems that we have in society is that ethics is a higher standard than the law. It really, and so many times the law fails us where it doesn't do with ethical. But to address it, I will say the following. There have been enough commentaries that on this problem of diversity with AI, and especially in the police law enforcement area of AI affecting minorities inappropriately and disproportionately, that number one, some manufacturers have now stopped selling their equipment to the police.
Oh, really?
Yes. There are a number of places that have said we're no longer going to supply facial recognition technology to the police departments. So that's happening. And number two, the big tech guys have heard the complaints, and they are trying to now implement and make their software more compliant and more sensitive to these issues. Whether it will happen and whether it will make a difference, who knows? But
self-policing.
But they've heard it. They have heard it, and hopefully they will do it. Just to give one example that to me is just so mind-boggling. I said before, 23 states have actually passed laws trying to protect the privacy of people from companies using their information. Illinois happens to be the model of this. Kate, you may be familiar with your biometrics law. So basically what Illinois did, and was the first state to do it, is they passed a law basically saying that if a company wants to use your image and your information, They have to tell you that they're going to do it, and they have to get your permission. So having told you that, I'd like to tell you about a lawsuit that has rocked the world. All right. And the case is called Patel versus Facebook. And what happened in this litigation is Facebook was using facial recognition technology. You know, you go on Facebook and all of a sudden they identify your friends, and how the heck do they know my friends? All right. Well, it's from the facial recognition technology. So a group of people got together and they filed a class action lawsuit against Facebook. And it went all through the courts. And I will tell you that Illinois is one of a handful of states that allow a private remedy. Most only allow the government to sanction. Illinois allows a private remedy. That case was settled last year for $650 million. And
I didn't get any of that.
yeah, and attorney's fees of $97.5 million. It makes a difference. So yes, they are recognizing it. So as the legislature starts passing rules to protect our privacy, you can see results such as $650 million.
Interesting. So we have another question that sort of built.
Oh.
Oh, go ahead, Jason. Did you want to say something, or Andy?
I
think that was
I was just going to mention very quickly. I think that all technologies can be used for good and for bad. I mean, back to Kate's example. I mean, we didn't stop cars being on the road because you could run people over with them, right? And I understand that that's sort of not relevant to the discussion. But if we look at a documentary called The Social Dilemma, if you haven't watched it on Netflix, it's really interesting, where it explains that you are the product, right? You're giving your data and they're nudging you in particular directions. You can see that the real issues around addiction and around sort of how that's changing society, that's bad, right? But the same technology, if I can use it to understand your propensity to acquire additional education and how you might be able to afford that and what the opportunities are for you for career and life advancement, it's the same technology, right? So I think that we need to really think about that the technology and how it's used, it's a problem, not necessarily sort of, not just looking at the technology itself.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the questions is, as an African-American male, will AI become another issue in relation to civil rights and racial discrimination, or will it help right the wrongs we face currently in global society? And I think you all just answered that, right? It's like, it depends on how we use it. But I think that's also related to this idea of a lot of, and you mentioned this earlier, Sam, a lot of police departments bought this AI technology to determine who gets bail or whatever, who gets out of jail early. And it was completely based on very biased data. And a lot of the buyers who bought it really didn't know what questions to ask. So my question that's really related to this question about will it be good used for good or ill is, clearly the people making decisions in organizations about whether to buy or not buy this are not well informed. And you all spoke to this earlier. So how do we inform people that they have to think about these wider criteria? How do we help shift the conversation so that it's less about what technology can do for you and more about this larger impact? I think it's because businesses, it's just somebody sitting in an office somewhere has an idea to go buy the software and then just goes through their software purchasing process, right? They're not looking at the wider implications. So how do we increase awareness of the full potential for good or for ill of this technology?
One quick response would be the Bill of Rights that was passed by the Biden administration. What has to, one of their founding principles is not to discriminate. It's one of the 5 principles. What has to happen is the legislature has to now implement that, and they have to pass rules safeguarding people. So the framework is there. The Biden administration gave us the framework. We now have to put teeth behind it.
I think the other way is sort of where we started to, and Andrew mentioned that they're doing this in Pittsburgh, right? I think it's starting early to try to create that AI fluency so that this next generation understands that there is more to consider than just that typical software purchasing process, right? There's a lot that goes into it, and much more so than if you were to purchase a rules-based system, right? So doing that early education, as those individuals grow up and become the next generation of leaders in this space, they're already going to have those, those considerations are already going to be top of mind for that next generation.
And I think we can't overlook the fact that this technology is only going to benefit us. It's like the computer. We can sit here and point out problems with the internet and the computer, but it has changed our lives.
Yes.
Artificial intelligence is going to change our lives, and it's going to change it for the
Yeah.
better. And we have to realize that. We just have to tweak it and
Yeah.
make people more aware of how to tweak it.
And I would go back to what Kate said in their large global study. Leadership is absolutely the key, that leaders have to demand that AI is used in a responsible way, and it needs to be measured. It's the same thing as ethics. If leadership is, they need to espouse ethics and live them, whatever it may be. That AI is the same way. It's responsible use of AI starts top.
So then last question, and then we'll wrap it up. When you think about the whole movement on corporate social responsibility, I've never heard anybody talk about responsible use of technology or responsible use of AI. It's always been about, impact on society, but in a very nebulous way, like more about socioeconomics or about the environmental impacts, but you're not hearing anybody really talk about or loop in this idea of technology as part of corporate social responsibility. I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that. Anyone?
Okay,
Silent.
I'll start. I mean, I have no problem addressing that. It's I think that we have to incorporate it into our thinking. There's absolutely no doubt. Whenever anything new appears on the scene, we have to ask, what is the impact on our responsible use of technology or whatever it may be? And I think that if it's not part, because it is well, humans are biased in and of themselves.
Yes.
Right. So corporate responsibility means acting and behaving in a responsible way. The AI is part of our ecosystem. It has to behave in the same way. We have to treat it as though it is part of ourselves in that decision-making process, and ask the question, is it being used to help or to harm? So I think that's critical in sort of the future of the development of AI as an effective tool.
Cool.
We also have to remember that we're at the very early stages of litigation involving all these issues with AI. And I can assure you that Facebook will not use pictures of people again after they got hit with a $650 million verdict. So as the court decisions come down, and they will be coming down in the very near future, I think you'll see the social changes taking place in response to the law. We're just not there yet. It's too soon with the technology.
It's back to Kate's car analogy.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, Kate, on this? And then Jason, you wrap us up.
Yeah, I totally agree. Technology needs to be a part of that corporate responsibility conversation. It should be a big part of it. It impacted Facebook, as Sam mentioned, to such a degree. And I think as a CIO or CEO, you need to be in front of it and realize that this is something you need to think about, and that it will absolutely impact your bottom line.
Cool. Final thoughts, Jason?
Just a thought. My inclination is always to think about it in terms of cost of doing business. And I think the tricky part is if it's just a line item and it's just one part of an equation, is that really going to solve the problem, or are businesses really going to take it seriously? Now, of course, Facebook, $600 million, that's substantial, but
that's a big line item.
That's a big line item. But if it's just a line item, I always have a little bit of difficulty getting past that. And if it's just part of an equation.
Yeah, so incredible, everybody. What a great, rich conversation. Thank you, Jason, for leading it. Thank you, Kate, Sam, and Andy, for your variety of perspectives and insight. Thank you, everyone who was able to join us. a wonderful time, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Have a wonderful day.